Hello and welcome to Hot Topic. I'm Hugh Riches. This week I'm with Paul Gooland, a director of Clugston, the Scunthorpe-based firm working in construction, civil engineering, logistics, property development and what its website calls facilities management, which I assume means checking for soap and clean towels. He's here in his capacity as a member of the Hull and Humber Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber serves around 1,400 businesses of all sizes, and it has its mission statement of growing your business and building our economy. Paul, welcome. Many thanks for coming in.
Good to be here.
First of all, to talk in your capacity with the Chamber of Commerce as the chairman of the North Lincolnshire part of
The Scunthorpe end.
the Scunthorpe end of the Hull and Humber Chamber of Commerce. That mission statement is optimistic, growing our economy. How is our economy?
Our economy is actually doing very well, and in fact some would say sort of more than one would expect compared to the fact that the rest of the world still seems to be struggling, because when you look at near Europe and when our neighbours like Germany, who we've historically looked at as a great beacon of sort of business improvement, are struggling, and I think China, Japan, India are also starting to sort of see a downturn. We in the UK are actually doing very well, and to some degree that has to make us a little bit nervous, because we are sort of out there at the moment leading the field rather than historically being sort of one tagging behind. We are an economy that does depend very much on exports, and particularly selling our services to the rest of the world. So if the rest of the world's starting to sort of see another downturn, it has to be of concern to us. But yeah, at the moment, businesses generally are optimistic after several years of, I suppose, doom and gloom. And this time last year, people were talking about cautious optimism. I think now they're talking about genuine sort of growth, and we're seeing it in our industry, which is construction. And usually people say it's the first into recession and the last out. We're certainly seeing improvements across the board. A little bit slower in some areas, and I think if you look historically, London and the South East has never really had a recession.
Well, we're going to talk about different regions within the country, and our region especially, but we had just last week, we had some good figures about unemployment, and we had some very good figures about inflation. Unemployment going down and inflation going down. It doesn't always feel that good though, does it?
No, it doesn't, and I think one of the features of it is that wages definitely haven't sort of had that kickback. And I suspect that's probably why the retailers are struggling. We've very much in the past relied on people spending, and the sort of discretionary spending is clearly tight. And without that, things will certainly still continue to feel tight. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge facing the government, to actually make people feel that there is a genuine improvement in the pound in their pocket.
Well, if the labour market is in it's almost a novel stage where the labour market is employing more people, because there have been so many more people unemployed, it can employ more people at a lower rate. An awful lot of people just aren't going to feel that pound in their pocket.
And I think that's true. I think there's definitely a large number of jobs that have been created that are not high-earning jobs. Certainly in certain sectors, there's a lot of talk about the sort of 0 hours contracts, those type of things. And I think until we can improve productivity and the skills level and start to generate real sort of, I suppose, added value into our industries, we will suffer with that. I think productivity in the UK is actually a fair bit behind the rest of Europe, even though we're actually starting to see our economy grow. And I think that is the area where people are feeling it. We're still dependent on an awful lot of, I suppose one would say, lower paid jobs. And that's where the government has definitely a political issue to resolve, because that's the feeling that people have.
And the problem with that is that if so many people have lower paid jobs, they don't have the money to buy the things, the goods and services that the rest of the economy is making. And so that becomes almost as much a brake on the economy as unemployment.
It does. And until that sort of starts to improve and productivity and wages can rise, there will be that aspect of the continued growth.
You mentioned London and the South East a moment ago. We could talk about Scotland as well, and other parts of the country. Our area, Yorkshire, Northern Lincolnshire, the Humber, we're a little bit behind, aren't we, for the rest of the economy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that sort of that ripple effect that's sort of spurned from London it is clearly an issue, and we notice it, within Clugston's, because we have offices in the North East and operations up there. And I would say they're even a little bit further behind Yorkshire and Humberside.
It really
in
is. The
terms-
further north you go, then the slower the recovery is
definitely
happening.
is, yeah.
Why?
I think certainly the northeast and this area of the country certainly depended an awful lot on public sector spending. And public sector spending, as we all know, is the one area that's been absolutely hammered and I think will continue to be hammered. And initially when I suppose the government's spending to try and sort of close the black hole in the accounts, as that started to sort of be resolved, obviously particularly local authorities were heavily cut back. And again, there's still a significant amount of that deficit to be resolved. In fact, I think it's probably as big now as it was at the time. And that will put pressure on local spending. And the North historically has, had not the majority, it's had a good level of support from public spending, which is now sort of dissipated to a degree.
Well, you must have, as an officer of the Chamber of Commerce, a trading, market-based business capitalist organisation, ambivalent feelings about that, because that public spending itself was created by cash taken from people successfully doing business.
Absolutely.
That public pump priming sort of Keynesian New Deal style of spending, it may be comfortable at one end, but it's very uncomfortable at the other end, as that money's taken away in tax.
Absolutely. But the difficulty is, we had a period of spending when the investment went into, or the political the political emphasis was on increasing and improving public services, and a lot of money certainly went into health and education, and we had the major BSF programme, and they were good in many ways because...
Sorry, BSF programme?
Building Schools for the Future.
Of course.
Massive investment, not as, I suppose, productive as it could have been, because I think there were issues with the way it was procured and the length of time it took for projects, improvements in school to happen, but it certainly did improve a good number of schools, but maybe not as many as people would have liked it to have done. And similar issue with the health sector. The health sector still has a lot of old properties and old premises that are being used to deliver, I suppose, healthcare services that are not what one would expect in the 21st century. A lot of money went into that, but it's not given us in some areas, the 21st century facilities that I think we hoped for at the time.
If I can ask you to put your construction hat on, as it were, from Clugston's, there's much talk of this area requiring a much greater infrastructure connection with the rest of the world, apart from anything else. But,
Yes.
But we'll come into some of the reasons why the rest of the world might want to be connected to us. But what are the infrastructure projects that you'd hope to see in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire?
Well, certainly in this area, because there's no doubt, because of the proximity to the North Sea and the offshore wind, and also the shift towards biomass. So we've got the world, I suppose, changing from, well, certainly this country, from coal to wood. A lot of that is coming through.
It's a backward step, it seems, doesn't it?
It does in some ways, but it's a renewable source. But that material, those projects are coming through the Humber. The Humber still isn't as well connected to the rest of the UK with transport, particularly rail, as it should be. And I believe today we've actually had a visit from the Transport Minister to actually look at those issues. But it still is geographically feels and is a bit of a remote area of the country.
Well, there's talk of, on the south bank of the Humber anyway, which is your bailiwick, there's talk of a better connection by train, at least down to London, down to the south east.
Well, there is talk, but I think it's trying to protect that at the moment. There is definitely talk of trying to cut the Cleethorpes direct lines into Manchester Airport and into Manchester and down to King's Cross. And that would be a serious retrograde step for this area.
Well, there's also talk of improving the line down to London, isn't there? I mean, there are other options that are in the planning stages and that are going through various procedures in Parliament and elsewhere in the Department of Transport. That would be a benefit, surely.
Well, that's the bit that's been debated as to whether or not it will happen, and I think there is, there is, like many things, lots of things that were on the National Infrastructure Programme. When things start to unfold, don't often happen, and there's definitely concern that the rail connections from Cleethorpes could be taking a step back rather than a step forward, and that's certainly what the local MPs around here are pushing for.
One, just before we go into the break, transport infrastructure, the road from Scunthorpe to Grimsby, which you've just driven across, is one of the most disgusting, unpleasant and noisy roads in the country. What's to be done?
I suppose investment. It's not an overly busy road when you compare it to the M62 corridor. I mean, one has to accept that.
It's a corrugated road.
But it is a corrugated road. Yeah, it's not a high-speed motorway.
It's absolutely horrible. One final thing, the train systems from Immingham to the rest of the country, Immingham specifically, not the passenger trains, the freight trains. We'll talk about them after the break.
Right, okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please join us in a second after this break. Well, I know I ask you to predict the future. It's rather unfair to do that. But, I mean, say in 5-10 years' time, how many jobs will this developing technologies, developing industry, how many jobs do you think it'll create?
It's difficult. I mean, if you look at the sort of immediate jobs, they're talking, you know, a couple of thousand. But a lot of that will be, I suppose, jobs that are there to create and build the turbines. It's then what the legacy after that is in terms of operational maintenance, and certainly this side of the South Humber has already started to see investment in the operational and maintenance side, because you've got Dong Energy and Centrica both laying down roots here as their operational centre support offshore activities in the North Sea, and that's got to be a good move, because that will be long-term jobs.
Welcome back to Hot Topic. I'm talking to Paul Gooland, representing the Hull and Humber Chamber of Commerce. Paul, we were just about to start, we were talking about infrastructure before the break, and the reason we need infrastructure is we all hope the development of the renewable energy industry around the Humber. What progress there? Is it going as fast as it should be?
I think it's now getting near to sort of, I suppose, fruition. I think everybody's been, I suppose, frustrated by the amount of time it's taken for some of these things to take place, and I believe Siemens over in Hull with ABP are pretty close now to sort of, I suppose, pressing the button, and so we are seeing the sort of the foundations starting to sort of take place after what has definitely been a long, frustrating time for, I think, everybody in this region. This side of the river, there is clearly still work to be done, and Able are still pushing to get their project underway, which I think we're all aware of the sort of dispute that has been kicking off for quite a time between Able and ABP.
This is the famous Killinghome Triangle.
It is, and clearly that's a frustration.
Just outline that issue once again for us.
I'm not sure the exact sort of thing. It all revolves around, I suppose, land that has to be used for conservation purposes, from what I understand. But it's got as far as, I suppose, Parliament getting involved. But I do believe that issue is now on the agenda. It is starting to sort of go through the consultation group that's been formed to look at it. So one would hope there'll be a decision one way or the other. And I think, you know, to be fair to both Able and ABP, they're as keen to get the issue resolved, and hopefully that will happen soon. But there are other things happening, you know, besides the offshore wind, because, you know, ABP again have invested heavily in biomass storage and distribution coming through to go to Drax, who have converted to burning wood pellets, and they're coming in from around Europe. We're also seeing investments in places like Furry Bridge, again, to use non-coal as their feedstock. And I suppose we've also ourselves benefited at Clugston's from a project over at Hull for the biodiesel plant at Vivergo. So there are projects, as well as the sort of headline ones, the offshore wind, that have been taking place in this area. And I think it is widely recognised the Humber is the place to put the energy infrastructure in, and the knock-on effects of that hopefully will be improvements in infrastructure and, critically, creation of new high-tech jobs.
Well, I know I ask you to predict the future. It's rather unfair to do that. But, I mean, say in 5-10 years' time, how many jobs will this developing technologies, developing industry, how many jobs do you think it'll create?
It's difficult. I mean, if you look at the sort of immediate jobs, they're talking, you know, a couple of thousand. But a lot of that will be, I suppose, jobs that are there to create and build the turbines. It's then what the legacy after that is in terms of operational maintenance. And certainly this side of the South Humber has already started to see investment in the operational maintenance side, because you've got Dong Energy and Centrica both laying down roots here as their operational centre to support offshore activities in the North Sea. And that's got to be a good move, because that will be long-term jobs. But it's the supply chain, it's how many of the people providing the sort of components for the offshore wind can relocate here and manufacture here, rather than bringing them in and shipping items in and just assembling. So there are those aspects that I suppose are the knock-on effects that create lots of little smaller businesses feeding into the big ones, the different chains and tiers.
But then there's a sort of a double effect, because if you've got those knock-on businesses down the supply chain, then those people themselves will be more people in the region spending more money, thus just fermenting, as it were, a more fizzy economy in the region.
Yeah.
My economics, I'm no scientist for this, but would that be a right understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a similar, there's similar figures kicking around in construction that to encourage local spending, because I think the figures that the UKCG were using, that for every pound invested in local infrastructure, it creates £1 or £2.84 of economic benefit, because of the jobs, the local spending, and all the other things that go with it. And that sort of demonstrates the importance of local investments.
Moving on to one of the other subjects that I know that the Chamber is particularly interested in, which is training.
Yep.
Have we got enough people, not necessarily even young people of any age, have we got enough people who've got the skills, the craftsmanship, the knowledge and the understanding to exploit the possible job potentials that are coming up?
I think the straightforward answer is probably no. From certainly colleagues, members in the Chamber, they're all conscious of the skill shortage, particularly in engineering, that this area will need. And that is a concern, because you can't train people overnight. It takes a while, and there are the institute here itself is making investments in
Grimsby Institute.
In investment for engineering. We've got in Scunthorpe the commitment from the government, and the work started for the University Technical College for Humberside, which is its premise was to support and develop skills for the renewable sector, specifically for the renewable sector, and that's now under construction. We're also seeing other organisations engaging in that process as well, because that's important that we have businesses involved in making sure that the skills that are developed are the skills that they need, not this sort of, I suppose, diverse or diversity between education and business. Bringing the two together is actually critical to making sure we have the right people trained and the right numbers.
But do we have enough people, local people from this area, who want to go through that training, who want to take on those courses?
Well, the early signs, certainly with the UTC, having initially been fairly reticent, are now starting to build, and we are seeing people recognise that there are benefits from getting a career-orientated training programme from a relatively early age. That will start at 14 and will run will run in a traditional, I suppose, secondary school type of environment, but will have a leaning and input from businesses to encourage and mentor and check that the skills and the training levels are appropriate and right for businesses' needs, industry's needs.
But they'll still need to be studying all the other traditional
courses.
Absolutely,
and absolutely, and they will continue alongside that. So it's not as if, one of the comments back is that people will go into the UTC and be trained, and that'll be it to become, a lathe turner or whatever it is. That is not the case. They will have a full-rounded education, but there will be that input and support from industrialists who recognise and realise what the future skills levels need to be.
On a national scale, we're all very familiar with the concepts of a global economy and outsourcing jobs, and the fact that so much could be made in terms of goods and services, in fact, abroad. Yes. For much less money. So as you mentioned, China, India, Brazil, Russia, the BRIC countries, but lots of others as well, where there's a workforce that can create the same value but without the same cost.
Absolutely. But what we've got to be is quicker off the mark. We've got to be more innovative. I mean, the UK's got a long history of being innovative, of being at the cutting edge, and it's the high-tech cutting edge roles that we need to sort of differentiate ourselves from areas where, yes, you can get cheap labour, but we've shown ourselves, and certainly at the moment, of being able to hold our own. But it's got to be through being innovative and more productive.
So we need an expert labour force.
We need an expert labour, not a low-tech one.
One of the purposes of the Chamber of Commerce is to lobby government on various issues. What are you trying to persuade them to do at the moment?
In this vicinity, rail links is one of the key things, and making sure that they're both fit for the industrial side of things. That's moving large volumes of goods, but also that people can actually get access to the capital and to Leeds and Manchester. So the Chamber's been very active at lobbying with the local MPs, and the local MPs around here have been very good as a team.
Yes.
In actually working together to represent the area, looking at skills, and looking at sort of making sure that things like broadband are up to the best standards we can get. So the members of the Chamber are actually quite diverse, from small one-person businesses right through to the very large organisations.
I think your company had more than a £200 million turnover last year.
We did, and we predominantly have our operations in this area because Clugston's is a Scunthorpe born and raised business. Grew off the back of the steelworks, still does some works with the steelworks, but has diversified into other areas of construction and logistics and facilities management.
And as going back to that historical route, quite quickly, I'm afraid, what do you reckon is the future of that steelworks in Scunthorpe with the uncertainty over its ownership?
I think any change of potential ownership, because clearly they're going through the due diligence, is always unsettling. But the Clash Group have shown a commitment in the past to investing. They have other investments in steel manufacturing and petrochem around the world, and they've shown a commitment to doing that. So one can only be optimistic and hope that they will continue to support the growth and development of the steelworks.
And presumably what makes that more attractive to maintain the growth of the steelworks there is the increasing investment in the infrastructure that surrounds it in
absolutely. And the steel, particularly Scunthorpe Steel, has suffered from the downturn in construction because that's one of its main products, and rail.
If there's a possibility of the steelworks closing, what does that mean for Scunthorpe?
Well, I don't think it's I suppose imponderable in that sense. It's such a part of the town, but there's an awful lot of people. There's a lot of interest in making sure that there is a viable industry producing steel in this area.
Let's hope that works. I
Yes.
must stop there. Paul Goolan, thank you very much. That's all we have time for in this hot topic. I hope you'll join me for another one next week. But for now, goodbye.